Thank you, Charlie, and thank you to all of you who are on the line for joining us today. It's great to see many familiar faces as well as lots of new ones. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Renita Guha. I'm the Vice President for Strategy and Impact at the Link Learning Alliance, so welcome. Today's event, Strengthening K-12 Assessment Systems to Advance College and Career Readiness, is designed to be an intimate and interactive conversation with California decision makers across K-12 and post-secondary to explore how performance assessments can be powerful tools for measuring college and career readiness and driving more equitable outcomes for young people. These authentic approaches to assessment, which include presentations of learning, projects, portfolios, show not only what a student knows, but also what they can do, and are especially critical now as the COVID crisis has disrupted conventional methods of student assessment. Today, you'll hear from educators and students themselves who are addressing this challenge head on and have been for years, by creating strong assessment systems that provide students with rich opportunities to demonstrate to their teachers, peers, community members, and most importantly to themselves, that they have the skills, knowledge, and habits of mind necessary for success in college and the workplace. This event is being co-hosted by 3 organizations, the Link Learning Alliance, Envision Learning Partners, and the Learning Policy Institute, all of which have a longstanding commitment to advancing authentic assessments of learning. For the Link Learning Alliance, the organization I represent, performance assessments are an essential component of a high-quality Link Learning pathway. These types of assessments are embedded in our pathway certification standards as part of a rigorous integrated college and career program of study. You'll have an opportunity to hear today from Link Learning educators in Los Angeles Unified about their portfolio and defense model, and you'll get to observe students defend their learning. We're also joined today by Envision Learning Partners, which provides on-the-ground assistance to empower school and district leaders to build a supportive culture of learning. ELP works with educators to design systems of performance assessment that encourage students and teachers to learn and grow together. And then finally, we have our colleagues from the Learning Policy Institute, which facilitates the California Performance Assessment Collaborative. CPAC brings together educators from across the state as a professional learning community to advance and deepen their work around performance assessments. So today, you'll have an opportunity to explore how performance assessments, and in particular, one type of such an assessment, a defensive learning, can be part of a system of assessments for measuring what students know and are able to do. You'll learn how these types of assessments can serve as an authentic means for students to demonstrate acquisition of academic and technical knowledge, as well as the college, career, and life skills and dispositions they'll need for success after high school. We'll also talk about the key conditions needed to implement performance assessments both generally and in times of school closures and physical distancing. And in fact, we've had a really unique opportunity during COVID-19 to see how this type of assessment can be pandemic proof as students throughout the state have continued to demonstrate and defend their learning virtually as they'll do today. And finally, we'll discuss implications for using performance assessments more broadly to measure college and career readiness. And we've specifically invited you all here today because we want to explore with you how to support and scale these types of assessment practices through state policies, such as the College and Career Indicator, the State Seal of Civic Engagement, and through the Local Control Accountability Plan. We also want to explore the implications of this type of work for higher education policies related to college admissions, advising, and course placement, and through deeper engagement with community and industry partners. So as far as our agenda today, we're going to hear from Elsine Mumby from Envision Learning Partners. She'll provide an overview of performance assessments, what they are, the attributes of high quality assessments, and the historical origins of these types of assessments for driving more equitable learning experiences and outcomes for students. Then Anna Mayer from LPI will discuss the research behind performance assessments and talk about the work of the California Performance Assessment Collaborative to advance high quality performance assessments. Lindsay Corcoran from LAUSD's Link Learning Office will discuss the district's portfolio and defense model, and Adriana Trejo, principal of STEM Boyle Heights, which recently received Link Learning Gold certification, will provide an overview of their pathway program. And then you'll have an opportunity to observe an abbreviated student defense in a small breakout. We'll then come back together as a full group. Abby Benedetto from ELP will moderate a Q&A with the LAUSD team, and then we'll debrief as a group before closing. And just as a note, we want to be really mindful of your time. The formal portion of the program will end at 2 p.m., but the speakers will stay on the line until about 2:15 to answer questions and engage in further conversation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Elsine from Envision Learning Partners.
Hello. As a way to provide historical context for performance assessment. So performance assessment is rooted in the social justice movement and can be found in work that many social justice educators, particularly educators of color, have been doing for lots of decades. This moment of a global pandemic, a moment that has disrupted our collective busyness and reliance on the status quo, has created just enough pause in many of us to rethink the very purpose and function of our fundamental systems, structures, and institutions like education, policing, and public health. At this same moment, racial justice leaders have been building a movement and calling on our society to be more inclusive and less racist. Educators are now joining this racial justice movement by studying ways that they can be anti-racist and reaching for anti-racist instructional and assessment practices to implement. These teachers and school leaders are doing this work because they want to be better educators for all students, especially students of color. This moment brought on by this pandemic is now providing us, practitioners and policymakers, a unique opportunity to use our power and influence to create the conditions that enable educators to achieve their anti-racist vision and goals. On this call, we actually have some courageous higher ed practitioners and policymakers who have modeled for us how to use our power and influence to push on the testing structures of SAT and ACT and create room for our students whose brilliance might not be illuminated through these tests. We can use our power and influence to create opportunities for our most vulnerable and marginalized learners. And we've witnessed performance assessment as a proven and effective lever to bring about equitable outcomes for all learners, and are hopeful it can scale beyond pockets of excellence. So there's many dots that should be on this slide, but those are just a few that tell the story. All right, so the most straightforward way to think about performance assessment is from the framework of a driver's test. This behind the wheel performance assessment gives the assessor real information about the test taker's skills in safely operating a multi-ton vehicle. At the same time, this type of assessment preparing for this type of assessment helps students, helps the test taker improve these very skills. This is not the only type of performance assessment, but it is one that everyone, hopefully on this call, has experienced, and it highlights some key elements of what performance assessment is. Performance assessment requires students to construct an original response, which can measure higher order thinking skills and reasoning skills, as well as the ability to apply learning to solve meaningful problems. It has clear standards and skills being assessed, which are communicated ahead of time for a student to practice, get feedback on, and work toward. And examples of performance assessment include, open-ended questions that students can answer in a few short sentences, ranging all the way up to thoughtful, thorough analysis essays, conducting laboratory research, or completing original research. They can also take the form of graduation portfolios, which is a curated collection of student work used to evaluate mastery of different subject areas and competencies, or capstone projects, a student-designed culminating task that often has an action component to it. More extensive performance assessment often requires students to reflect on their learning over a sustained period of time. Performance assessments are typically also evaluated using rubrics, which are scoring guides that list criteria by which the work will be judged and describe different levels of quality for each criterion. Performance assessments by design are meant to be a formative, summative, and iterative process that centers the intelligence of our students, especially those students, our Black and Brown students, our English language learners, our students with disabilities, whose brilliance may not show up on standardized tests. Here are some of the criteria we have developed at ELP to guide the creation of high quality performance assessments. We define high quality performance assessments as those assessment opportunities that obviously elicit evidence of learning that matters. It's tight on criteria for success and inclusive of different learning approaches with a lens towards equity. It's also authentic. Performance assessment is a learning experience in and of itself. That means as a student moves through this performance assessment experience, they are learning more about themselves and their content. Anna is now going to share the research that shows that performance assessment can be an effective lever towards equitable outcomes in education.
Thanks, Alcine. Happy to be here. So a key point that I want to share today is that performance assessment is grounded in a substantial evidence base. And when we follow up after this event, we're going to share some specific resources that are helpful for making this point. One of the things that the evidence shows is that performance assessment can improve instructional quality and increase teacher collaboration. And you heard Alcine mention that one element of performance assessment is that it encourages the teaching of higher order thinking skills. It also brings teachers together to develop tasks and rubrics, review and score student work, and analyze results of the student work, which can then in turn lead to collaborative planning of instruction. It can also help to increase student achievement on traditional standardized tests. So there is a body of school-level studies showing greater gains on both standardized assessments and performance assessment for students who are exposed to a problem-oriented curriculum that gives them regular experiences with performance assessment in the classroom. Moving to the next slide, thank you. The evidence for performance assessment also shows that performance assessment can improve students' deeper learning and social emotional learning competencies by engaging them in complex interdisciplinary problem solving and allowing for choice, agency, reflection, revision, and collaboration in the learning process. And finally, there is some evidence that performance assessment can contribute to more equitable outcomes in higher education admissions. And this is based on a forthcoming study on a City University of New York pilot that uses performance assessment to admit qualified applicants with scores below 500 on the SAT. So after 1 year, these pilot students had a higher persistence rate, higher credit completion rate, and higher GPA compared to the general student population at CUNY. I hope I'm saying that right. So this evidence is early, but it's really promising, and this study will be coming out from the Learning Policy Institute very soon. So one of my jobs at LPI is to lead the work of the California Performance Assessment Collaborative. And the other key point that I want to make here is that performance assessment is happening in many places across our state and in many different contexts. So one of those contexts is CPAC, which is a statewide network of schools and districts that are working together to advance innovative, high quality, and equitable performance assessment. And this network was established in 2015. And CPAC includes over 60 schools across the state, as well as 6 districts with active engagement from district leadership. That includes Los Angeles, Oakland, Pasadena, and San Francisco Unified School Districts. 6 school networks, including the New Tech Network, Big Picture Learning, and the Internationals Network, and of course, technical assistance partners, such as those that we partnered with on this event. And of course, there is performance assessment happening in many other places in California as well. That includes linked learning pathways across the state that are bringing a career and technical education focus to college and career preparation, the Bay Area Writing Project, which is bringing a language arts focus to the work, the K-12 Alliance, which is focused on implementing next generation science standards, which of course include hands-on assessment, Y-Plan, Youth Plan, Learn, Act Now, based at UC Berkeley, that is engaging students in hands-on project-based learning and performance assessment through a civic engagement lens. And those are just a few examples of many in our state. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Lindsay, who is going to speak more about the work happening in LA Unified.
Hi, everyone. LA Unified is one of the largest districts in the United States, second to only New York City. We serve between 500 and 600,000 students across 1,009 schools. The students sharing their performance assessments today are each part of a linked learning pathway. A linked learning pathway is either a small learning community within a high or middle school, or a small autonomous school that implements linked learning approach by focusing on a particular industry theme and including performance assessment as part of that model. The school that you will hear from today is a small autonomous magnet school. In LA Unified, all linked learning pathways commit to having 8th and 12th graders complete a portfolio and a defense. Though there is some variation in when a student in a linked learning pathway first engages in work related to their portfolio, the district's linked learning office advises all pathways to start guiding students through their performance assessment process early and middle and high school. We also suggest that assigning interdisciplinary project-based assignments focused on career technical education and academic skills at least twice a year, starting in 9th grade. The portfolio is a type of performance assessment that involves a curation of a collection of original student work and is used to evaluate mastery and/or growth in different subject areas and across different grade levels. Often, this includes the student's reflection on the included assignments and their own growth over time. Not only do students curate their portfolios from one year to the next, they must choose what to present during their defense presentation. Pathways provide guidance for students, though typically they will select 2 to 3 academic artifacts that align to their pathway and the LA Unified's graduate profile. The student learning outcomes are a reflection of this district graduate profile. For each artifact, the students will walk the audience through the requirements of the assignment, a summary of their work, and a reflection on how this work, both inside and outside the classroom, demonstrates the student's acquisition of the pathway student learning outcomes and academic competencies, all while using the presentation to share direct evidence of and reflect on their learning and personal growth. The portfolio defense truly requires students to demonstrate both academic readiness and 21st century skills. Today, you will hear from students at STEM Boyle Heights, who will present their senior defenses. STEM Boyle Heights is a small science, technology, engineering, and math themed magnet school and linked learning pathway in Boyle Heights neighborhood of LA. The school's vision is to create a school where a collaborative staff will increase the number of students who enter college and graduate with STEM degree, and to foster an environment that develops analytical thinking, innovation, invention, teamwork, and communication skills. I would like to introduce Adriana Trejo to speak more about the design of their assessment system and the structures in place to support this work at the site level.
Thank you, Lindsay, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. So as was mentioned earlier, our school just earned gold certification this year through the first virtual process, so we're really proud of that. This work began for us 4 years ago when we began implementing the linked learning framework. And this was the 3rd class that presented a senior defense. And we are extremely proud of every single student that went ahead and did it, even though it was virtually. So that was something that they were preparing for throughout the year. One of the key elements at our school is that every one of our students has what we call STEM Lab. It's an advisory type period where students explore college and career options and begin to develop their portfolios by selecting artifacts or creating resumes, different items that would be essential to have. Within that STEM lab, 12th graders had already began preparing for this process. Unfortunately, in March, the week before they presented, schools closed. So we had to refocus and figure out a way for them to still do this and to honor the work that they had already done and really validate their learning. I think this process allows teachers and staff and students as well to have validation of what they have learned. For the teachers, they participate in planning throughout the year, both as grade level teams or interdisciplinary teams. And the senior defense is that culmination of that work. They get to see whether these projects that they are planning for students are meaningful enough, if they're aligned to the student learning outcomes as expected, and what students are taking away from them. And this allows them to do that, these presentations. The virtual platform, what it did for us this year is it allowed a larger number of staff members to really participate and to hear from students and to make connections as to what is meaningful to them. So it's not just the content skills that they're learning, but that collaboration, those communication skills, things that students really have to use when they're out in the field. And then an extra layer that our students and teachers have is our industry partners participate in these defenses and provide feedback to our students and feedback to our staff at the end in terms of these are the strengths we saw from your students, and these are some things that you might continue to work on. Overall, it's a process that requires rigorous planning. The delivery is amazing. It's great to see students reflect on their own learning and also be able to tell us about their growth. So overall, I think key pieces are having the time for students to develop that portfolio, for teachers to plan together and to create these meaningful assessments. And then that presentation at the end is just a culmination of this project and the 4 years. The other thing our school tries to do is implement mini defenses throughout and provide opportunities for students to practice so that their 12th grade year is not so, it's not overwhelming for them. They know it's expected, they know they will present, and as they share their learning publicly throughout the 4 years, then they're ready to do this by the time they're 12th graders. So at this point, I'd like to introduce the 2 students that will be presenters. These 2 young people are graduates of the class of 2020. Both of them have been at our school for 4 years and successfully presented a longer version of what you will see today. Montse will be pursuing a business administration degree at Cal Poly Pomona, and Josepi Mendoza Torres is an aspiring architect who will be at UC Berkeley this coming year. So we're really proud of both of these young people. They both participated in the numerous opportunities that Linked Learning, through the Linked Learning process, including internships in the summer, both for 2 years, I believe, both of them. So I'm very proud of both, and we hope that you get to see what this process has done for them and for our staff as well.
Thank you, Adriana. As noted today, the defenses of portfolio you will see are shorter than usual. You will experience a brief introduction of the student and their presentation of a single artifact. You should attend to the way that the student describes their artifact, including the goal of the assignment, their learning experience, and their content knowledge about the work. Our students may present growth artifacts, in which case you will experience them sharing 2 separate artifacts from their high school years and identifying the ways in which they improve their work products based on feedback. At the end, you should feel free to ask questions about their artifacts, their learning experiences, and the students themselves. Charlie will now assign everyone to breakout rooms to observe our amazing students present.
Thanks, Lindsay. So everyone's been assigned to a breakout room and should be immediately invited to join. You'll have 20 minutes in this breakout room, and I will broadcast reminders to let folks know how much time is left. We'll be back as a group at 1:45. Enjoy.
Okay, I want to welcome people back to the main room. My name is Abby Benedetto, and I work for Envision Learning Partners and just have the joy of spending time with so many of the people on this call. And so we wanted to give the room really a chance to hear from some of the adults that were a part of supporting the systems that support Montse and Giuseppe to do this amazing reflection in these defenses. So I just have the honor of being able to ask some questions to Esther Solomon, who is the administrator for Linked Learning in LAUSD, to Lindsay, who you heard from earlier, who also supports the Linked Learning system in LAUSD, and then Adriana, the principal of STEM Boyle Heights. So Adriana, I'd love to sort of hear from you first. Could you talk a little bit about how you feel like the portfolio defense has impacted or shaped your school's community or culture?
Yes, thank you. I think that the portfolio allows, it's twofold. It's for the students to really have that opportunity to reflect on their own learning and think deeply about what that was. I know in our group, Montse mentioned SLOW, student learning outcomes, right? As a school, you always have goals as what you hope that students walk away with, besides the content skills. What this allows the teachers and the students to do is, one, as they plan, prepare lessons that are really going to address those. One of the things she mentioned was communication, right? Like, how are we doing that? And how does our lesson prepare students to do that? And then for the students, they're able to really reflect and say, wow, when I was a ninth grader, I used to really tremble when I had to do these presentations. And now here I am presenting virtually to a group of adults. In Monse's case, Giuseppe is just as capable as well. And I think that once teachers sit in during a senior defense, they're able to then reflect on those activities, those projects, everything that they've planned for their students, whether or not it met their goal. Were students able to really articulate their learning and demonstrate the skills that they wanted to take away from it? And if it didn't, well, then how do we go back to the table and improve that and really provide our students those opportunities to learn the collaboration skills, the communication, or just an appreciation of what STEM is in our case?
Thank you so much. I love that. I love that you said that earlier too. I know that when I was teaching in a system that had a portfolio, I always was so grateful for the data that I got as a teacher of how well or how not well I taught something based on what I heard students say back to me in the defense. It was so brilliant. I just felt so grateful for that. Thank you. Esther, could you tell us a little bit about, you have been such a huge proponent of portfolio defense and performance assessment for so long. What were some of the reasons for why you chose to really have performance assessment be a central thing of linked learning in LAUSD?
So good afternoon, everyone. Great to be on here. Thank you so much, Adriana. Thank you so much, Monse, for doing such a great job representing your school and your district and all of us. Thank you. So I think always, since I was a teacher 40 some years ago, the idea of humanitas, of joining things together, of bringing ideas together, of reflecting, of presenting, all of those aspects kind of came together in a culmination of really emphasizing linked learning, and then really emphasizing, if we have a graduate profile, what is it as a district do we want our students to achieve? What does each school in their SLOs want each student to achieve? Then how do we know that they've actually achieved that, right? They're doing presentations all along, as Monse said, starting in the 9th, 10th grade, having to make these presentations, working with industry, having a chance to do these, opportunities to speak in front of public. I mean, it's so wonderful to see how poised our students are as a result of that. And then that culmination is an opportunity. It has multiple reasons for doing it. One is to see, are we really preparing our students for that next step? Are they really meeting those graduate elements that we've identified? And then our teachers able to reflect on that. I mean, I had a teacher when I was a principal who was one of my students long before that, and he was very much against this until he went to his first portfolio defense and he heard what the students said, and he said, oh my God, I thought I did a better job teaching that. They really don't have a deep understanding of that. I mean, so it serves such multiple purposes. But again, one of the main purposes, I think, is what we don't use enough, is the celebration. The celebration of that student, that they've achieved that and that they are ready to move on. It's a passage, a life passage.
I love that, Esther. Thank you so much. Lindsay, I'm going to ask one more question and throw it to you, because you do such an amazing job of supporting the implementation of linked learning at these different schools. Can you talk a little bit about what layers of the system do you feel like people need to have in place or try to implement in order to successfully move students to get to this end result that we've seen from Monse and Giuseppe?
So in the linked learning approach, a huge piece is that integrated interdisciplinary work. And there are many structures that we hope schools will have in place to allow not only educators, but also students the ability to deeply reflect about the work that they do on a daily basis. A couple of those structures are cohorted scheduling and in giving teachers the planning time that's necessary to truly develop out these performance assessments, test them, reflect on how the students performed, and then improve the next performance task or performance assessment that they implement with their students. In addition to cohorting schedule and planning time, for students, we really push our schools to have an advisory period. And it was spoken about by Ms. Trejo, and Giuseppe did a nice job of talking a little bit about his STEM lab as well when he presented in the breakout room. And so the advisory class really gives our teachers an opportunity to connect with students on a deeper level and bring all of these, both the academic and social, emotional, and career readiness skills together and help their students make those connections more formally with that time. So I think the biggest piece is really ensuring that our schools build in time to do this work intentionally and build out a professional development plan that is rooted in performance assessment and that models performance assessment practices throughout teachers' experience while they're in PD weekly or bi-weekly, whichever the school has in place.
I love that. Thank you so much. I think it's such a, people are talking about how we have an opportunity right now to perhaps reimagine, restructure, sort of build how school happens. And I think that time piece is so critical. You can't just plop a portfolio defense, into the last little bit of your system. And so I do think that time is great. Okay, thank you so much to the panelists. I'm gonna kick it back over to Renita, and Renita's gonna continue to facilitate a larger discussion with the folks here. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Abby, and thank you again to Giuseppe and Monse for sharing your learning and your journey with our participants today. We are just so proud of all of you've accomplished and how you've represented your district. And thank you to our LAUSD educators, to Esther, Lindsay, and Adriana for your leadership of this work. So we're going to open up the conversation. I have a few questions that I'd like to pose for you. You can feel free to chat your response, or you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. But I want this, let this be a dialogue. So if you are off video, if you want to get on video, that'd be great. First of all, I'm curious what you've learned today and what you may still have questions about. So if you want to raise your hand, actually, I should see if I can make sure I can see the participant list. So yeah, please raise your hand or just unmute yourself and jump in. We'd like to hear, what did you learn? What was interesting to you? What do you still have questions about? And how, and I'm also just curious, what evidence did you see of students demonstrating their readiness for college and career and civic life? So does anybody want to jump in?
Sarah has a great question in the chat also.
I will go. Sarah, why don't you just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask it?
Well, this is directed to the last statement that Lindsay made, and I loved kind of that punctuation of like creating the structures for the time to collaborate, that this is like teamwork happening, and then it's about time to plan, to collaborate, to calibrate, and to do reflection as adults, as also creating space for students to collaborate and reflect together. And I'm wondering, as schools transition, where do they find the time? Because there's like time is a finite resource, and it's something we hear around the country. So like, where did teachers and schools find things to let go of as they transition to make the time? Is that a fair question?
So if it's okay, I can respond to what we've done. And then I think time is, there's never enough time. Every time we have professional development or planning, teachers' wish is always more time. So I think that's, you can never find enough. However, we try to be creative within our bell schedule in terms of how we are organizing that to maximize instructional time, but also professional development time. We are a pilot school within LAUSD, so that's one of our autonomies. So we definitely try to capitalize on that, building in professional development time weekly and some common planning time throughout the week as well. So we meet more than probably many schools. We have gotten rid of nutrition, for example. That might be one place where people can find a few minutes here and there. But I think it's about prioritizing what you want to accomplish that year, and then really just going deep on a few things versus, a list of 20 different topics for the year. For us, these past 2 to 3 years, it's been developing the rigor within our classrooms, and that's what we focused on.
Great.
That's a great point, Adriana. And I just want to piggyback on that a little bit in regards to that intentionality of the approach. And we can't do everything all at once. And so I think really helping our site leaders and our lead teachers and teacher leaders on campuses prioritize what next steps they should implement to strengthen that performance assessment system, and a true belief that performance assessment is the assessment system, right? And building everything backwards, planning it to that if we know that the defensive learning is coming at the end of 12th grade, what are expectations for that graduate, and how do we plan the rest of our assessment system backwards to lead up to that? And I think sometimes one of the pieces that we have conversations with our schools around is how do you ensure that all of the assessments within that assessment system are represented so that the time can be really spent intentionally and teachers aren't feeling like they're pulled in multiple directions.
Great.
And
Thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would just add that I'm a little more the radical side, having come from a pilot school and being a principal of a pilot school. I think you let go a lot of the stuff that the district asks you to do, and you have to be willing to kind of do the minimal amount that you need to do so that you can scoot under that. And then you do what you need to do, and you make priorities as a school, and as a pilot school, you have the ability to do that. I think when we start, kowtowing to what the district wants us to do, then we can start diluting what it is we're trying to do. So we have to be careful that we prioritize what we prioritize and support what we support. And, better to ask forgiveness than permission.
Paul and Sarah, I'm going to come back to your questions because I do want to make sure some of the folks who are from higher ed and policy have a chance to just weigh in. For higher ed folks, I just wanted to ask, if as you've listened and learned today, what are some of the implications you're thinking about for higher education in terms of college admissions or course placement and advising, and especially given, and think about like what the opportunities are right now, given that standardized tests have been waived, and in many cases, many colleges have been test optional for a while. So just want to give some of our higher ed friends a chance to jump in if they'd like. And I'm not sure if any of them are still on. Okay. The other question I have is for our policymakers, just thinking about the implications for our college career indicator, our state seal of civic engagement, others. What's some maybe thinking we can be doing about how to encourage this type of assessment through state policy? All right. Feel free to think about that, those questions, chat in the box. Sarah and Paul, so I'm going to come back to your questions now. Paul, you asked, did you find that going remote made it easier or harder to support these types of performance assessments? And this is directed to Adriana and Lindsay. And Sarah asked, what did you learn in distance learning that you're carrying forward? So those, Adriana and Lindsay, if you can maybe address those two questions.
I can start. In regards to the support of this performance assessment work, I do think that our current context actually opens the door to building out more performance assessments, especially given the fact that, for example, universities and other systems have changed the way we're looking at assessment by taking that SAT and ACT off the table. And so in the last few months, we've really been testing out lots of different approaches. Our schools and school leaders have dove straight into the deep end this spring, and many of them successfully implemented lots of different performance assessments in this space. I know that we have quite a bit to figure out when opening schools in the fall and trying to figure out where and how this work fits in. But I do think that there's quite a bit of opportunity to continue to grow on the successes that our schools have had. And in regards to supporting them, we have been watching them and coaching them and supporting schools through virtual presentations and defenses of learning. And one huge opportunity that this distance learning has afforded us is the availability of industry and authentic audiences. I think with everyone working from home, we've actually seen that more of our authentic audiences have been able to engage directly with students when doing a virtual defense or virtual presentation of learning, which has been a big victory for us.
Great, thank you. Adriana, do you want to add anything to that?
I would just say I definitely agree with everything Lindsay said. And I think what it's also done is it's forced all of us, administration or teachers as well, to really rethink how we are assessing student learning. We can't just push out a test and then expect students to just give us answers via an online platform, our finals at our school look different this year. They were not just assessments in class. Teachers asked students to put together presentations of learning, which they might have not done if they were in class, because it's easier to do the traditional method. So I think it definitely pushes all of us to learn and adapt. So that's one takeaway I think that all of us are walking away with.
Thank you. I'm going to just we're a little after 2, so I'm going to close this out. But if folks who want to stay on for a little longer, the participants and the speakers will stay on till 2:15. But I am going to just let you know in terms of how you can stay engaged moving forward. You can watch, LAUSD has a video on their performance assessment process, and we will, it's available at lausdportfoliodefense.weebly.com, and we can send that link to you. You can also be part of a student defense panel in your local community, just as Lindsay was talking about. It's a great way to stay engaged, great way in times of virtual learning, but hopefully also, at some point you'll be able to do it in person. And then please do share the resources from today's event with your colleagues and engage them in critical dialogue and reflection. Given what you heard today, what are your thoughts about the nature, purpose, and impact of assessment on students? And how's your own view of assessments been shaped by your experiences? So in closing, first of all, we hope that this event and engaging with educators and students who are leading these extraordinary efforts has started to spur your own thinking about what it means to truly understand and assess a student's readiness for what's next. We hope that you have started to see the potential of these assessments in lifting up the voices of young people who have often been marginalized, and ultimately how these types of assessments can drive more equitable outcomes across both K-12 and post-secondary. And finally, we hope you'll see that you all have a critical role to play in all this. And so if you'd like, please feel free to, in the chat box, take a minute to share what you might do in your role to create more equitable assessment systems. And we encourage you to stay connected with the California Performance Assessment Collaborative for additional opportunities for engagement. Please follow the Link Learning Alliance and Envision Learning Partners and LPI on Twitter. All of our organizations regularly share content related to performance assessment. Or if you want to get updates, feel free to add your name to the CPAC mailing list. And we'll, of course, be following up with an email with additional tools and resources. And the email will include this PowerPoint, which includes several resources around performance assessment and the research base, as well as a recording of today's presentations and discussions. So thank you to all of you who are able to join us and for taking time to be present and to engage with the students and the presenters. Please feel free to stay on for another 10 minutes or so and ask additional questions if you like. All the speakers will stay on. So thank you again for everyone who was able to take time out of their day to join us. And thank you to the students and educators. Anybody want to jump in with questions or anything that's still on, or is it mostly?
Well, Renita, one thing Justin asked was to the specific question around how the students experience the transition to virtual, shelter in place life. I think both Monse and Giuseppe could answer that question. Like how was it for them?
That'd be great. Monse or Giuseppe, do you want to jump in and answer that?
I'll go ahead and answer that. So we have, well, from my experience, I have received a bunch of professional feedback, which has actually helped a lot because you're getting feedback from actual professionals who are in the work field outside, outside of your comfort zone from school. So being able to get feedback from school and then feedback from professionals is very eye-opening, and it helps a lot. Even if it has to do with your resume or being able to just talk in front of people, they give you very important information that you didn't know before, and that will actually help you in the long run with work because you're remembering that feedback that they have given you, and it's really helpful in the future because it's coming from a professional, and that's my experience.
Thanks. Giuseppe?
We have to unmute.
Sorry. I definitely agree with Monse. I think that it's been really great to present to different atmosphere. And I think the first time that I presented my senior defense was more to complete the task. And now that I present it again, I feel like I've been able to reflect even more than I did the first time. So it's been really fulfilling, and I've been reflecting a lot, and it's been a great experience.
Thank you. Anyone else on the line want to ask any other questions?
I have a question for Giuseppe and Montse. As you're gearing up to go to school next year, there's a lot of college administrators on the call. And I think both of your schools are going to be distance learning next year. So do you have any advice for the colleges on the call of the considerations they should make with their students as they prepare to open their semester's distance learning?
I'm gonna go first.
You go first.
Well, at Berkeley, they said that most classes will be online, and it's not required for students to be there. Many students want to be there because of the college life. They want to start socializing and exploring the campus, but it's not required for the first year. So mainly they said, for students who might be on a budget, it might be better to save money and, stay at home. And yeah, so far that's what they said.
So I have to agree with Giuseppe because I recently just canceled my house application because I was getting ready to move out and, start my college life as well. But I really do feel like this is going to be a better kind of like experience given the whole COVID situation, just because it'll be able to help us financially. So that's already taking a lot out of our budget. And well, this is like learning from home. So I feel like you're a lot more flexible to whatever it is that you have to do. So you'll be able to plan everything out, and that'll just give more time for me to do the things that I have to do here at home.
So what do we want to tell the college people about if they're not looking at ACTs and SATs anymore to determine who might attend that college? What are your thoughts about what we can advise them, what they might be considering or looking at? Montse or Giuseppe?
People know that you'll be able to learn a lot from everyone, not just on a piece of paper and like pencil or whatever. You're gonna actually be in front of the person. You're gonna get to learn a lot about what makes them who they are and everything that they've been able to do and learn in their 4 years of high school.
Yeah, I really love the idea too, because usually I prefer to see how the admissions look at us personally and how we've grown throughout the years, because not everyone starts at the same page and not everyone's ends at the same page. And usually, well, the standardized test is more for average comparing to everyone, but with the senior defense, you're able to see more into who you're letting into the school.
And I think that's a really important point you're making, the opportunity for colleges to see growth over time, right? Not just where you end up, but where you started and how you've grown as a learner. I think that's really important. Anybody else want to jump in?
Can I just add to that question that Esther poses, Svetlana? How did actually applying the skills, and I can imagine that a college would want to know not only that you know things, but you know actually how to do things and apply your learning in a real project. So can you just comment on how actually having to translate what you learned in a book into real life? I saw, Giuseppe, how you actually built those cubes. That's hard. That's really hard to translate math into actually building a three-dimensional cube. If you could just tell us a little bit more about how the application helped you learn.
Yeah, it's been a real difficult process, and it's a lot of, like I was saying in my presentation, of failing and then trying again. And I think that's something that maybe it's not seen on applications, but I think it's very important to show how the students really focus on this, and maybe having like usually our school, we use an online application to send our things. So maybe having that stuff sent to the admission so they can read it and they can see our projects, whether it's a paper or it's a physical project, you know, they can be able to have evidence of how we've grown, and it's things that we've done during high school.
Great idea.
All right. Anyway, I don't know, Julie, if you want to mention anything about reimagining college access for the couple of folks who are on here that don't know about it.
Sure, I can, and I know Monica's on too, so I'm not the only representative. But yeah, I mean, this has been great, and thank you so much, Giuseppe and Montse, for doing your presentation. I think this is sort of exactly what we're hoping colleges will start and recognize. And at the Learning Policy Institute, we're starting to, over the last several years, we've really started to explore what this could look like, and you know, how higher ed can really start to see this work and see students with their whole selves, right? Not just what they see from a test score or through the limited measures and application. So we're really excited to see all this great work, and you know, we're hoping colleges will start to value it more and more. And I think the more we can show all this great work to them, I think the more they will start to recognize it and see that they can really learn about students by doing this.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in?
Montse, you wanted to say something? I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just gonna add on to what Giuseppe was saying with his puzzle cube, because I also did that. That was also one of my artifacts. But I was just gonna say that this is also a good way to show people what it is that you're learning in class, because if you're learning in class and you're able to like physically show them what it is that you've learned, then I feel like the studying and their process and everything is actually like really helpful to students.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Jeanette, were you going to jump in?
Yeah, I was just thinking, you know, as a reflection in general, because we got to hear from students, we got to hear, you know, from the school administrator and folks that are supporting this work, that to me, this conversation illuminates how important the coherence around the support and expectations are. And, you know, you specifically spoke to it, Lindsay and Esther and Adriana, when Abby was, you know, asking in the panel, like, how do these things nest together? But it's this kind of conversation to me that shows it demonstrated, right? Like the students are describing, this is how I felt, and this is what I learned, and this is what I reflected. And that's because there was deliberate intention so the teachers could provide those experiences over time. And you know, we don't get these results when we don't have that system of support and coherence for as many students as we would want. So I just want to validate, I guess, affirm that it is a system here that is operating, and there's really important, very personal connections within each of those, you know, interactions. But this is what's going to help, you know, make a more impactful change that's transformational and you know, more sustained over time, is when we have this kind of collaboration, support, and coherence.
Thank you, Jeanette. I think I'm going to make that the last word on this, since it's 2:15. Thank you, everyone, for joining, for staying on, and again to Giuseppe and Montse. We are, you know, can't wait to hear all the wonderful things you do once you're off to college and beyond. So please do stay in touch with your teachers and everybody else. And thank you again to everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Bravo.
Thanks, everyone.